Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Irene Franco Rubio from Latifam, and she will be in conversation with the writer-director Lisette Feliciano. So I will disappear and let Irene take it over from here. So go for it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Hi, Lizette. It's a pleasure to meet you. And thank you to everyone who is watching. Can I just say that was so powerful? There's so many things I want to dive into. And I just thank you for being here. It is awesome to meet you. And I really enjoyed the film. So I'm super excited to just pick your brain a little bit and learn more about it. But thank you. Thank you again for coming.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Irene. I'm so excited to talk to you, Ashley. I'm really, so Lorenza sends her apologies. She just got out of surgery, so her schedule's been a little bit, tough, as you can imagine, but she wants to say thanks so much to everybody for coming and watching, and I'm sure we'll find another time to get her on here.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you for that. And we wish her well and hope that all is well.
I'll let her know. Thank you. I'll let her know.
Amazing.
Yeah, ask away. I love this. I went to film school too. So tell me what grade are you guys all in?
Yes, so I am a junior at USC. I study sociology, but more generally, I'm an activist, community organizer, and writer. So I have some interest in film and then this type of work, and specifically just the overarching kind of themes that you touched on so well throughout the film. But that is a little bit about me. I don't believe Ashley is in on this, but I would pass it over to you to give a brief introduction. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself, not only as a director and producer, but also just you, like where you're from, and a little bit more of that.
Sure. And is everybody here is basically studying film, or is it USC in general?
I would say just generally students who are interested in film, but also it's open to the general public and audience.
Oh, fantastic. Amazing. Well, you guys know a lot about me. That is my family that you just saw. It was my mother, my grandmother, my step grandfather, my older brother, and my older brother's father, who I'm still really close with. I call him Papa Carlos. His name's not Mateo, it's Papa Carlos. And that's my high school that I filmed in the Mission District. That's where I grew up. So a lot of the things that my mother went through were things that I was going through 50, 60 years later. And so I decided to make a movie about the intersectionality of that struggle through generations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went to Tisch, did not go to SC. Sorry guys, I went to Tisch and I started to study film and television, just like some of you. And a couple of years later, kept writing, kept directing, trying to direct. It was very hard. Especially before 2016. But finally, I'd made enough money as a producer on commercials to be able to finance part of this film, and that's how it got here. So
yeah, no, a wonderful story. And I mean, it's really goes to show one, I mean, it sounds like a project that you've kind of been thinking of for some time and that you really wanted to invest in and make it something that resonates with people, not only folks who have that sort of lived experience, but also just need to learn and understand what it is that Latinx communities in particular experience. And I think it does an excellent job of showcasing that. So just
thank you.
Yeah. So just right off the bat, because I am just generally curious, and I did see a little bit more about some interviews you've done, but the title of this film I thought was super powerful. And of course, I would be remiss to not ask you a little bit about that. So if you could share with us what inspired that and what ultimately drew you to deciding with that name.
Oh, thank you so much. And just before I answer that, because I see that we're losing some people here, if you did like this film in any way, shape, or form, and you would like to support, the best way to do that is to go on Rotten Tomatoes and do an audience review. You don't have to write anything; just go ahead and hit 5 stars. 5, because if you liked it, give it a 5. If you didn't like it, give it a 2 or 3. Because that's kind of how the algorithm works, and that really helps us, and especially as grassroots indie filmmakers, which you all are going to be. You learn very quickly that those numbers do have an impact on your career. So I really appreciate that. Just Women as Losers on Rotten Tomatoes. Go ahead and hit 5 stars. And yes, back to the question. Women as Losers. I had heard. I wanted to do film music. Music is really important in my films and in the films that I like, probably the films that you guys like too. And I usually write with a song on repeat. That's how I write my scripts. My fiance hates it, but that's just kind of how I do it. And I wanted this movie to have female voices, musicians of the time. And like, because I'm from San Francisco, you really just like can't throw a rock without hearing Janis Joplin. But I had actually never listened to her music before, because to me, she was sort of like the Golden Gate Bridge. Like you don't really go there if you live in San Francisco. So I finally listened to her music, and I listened to her earlier music, and she had this song called Women as Losers, which no one had ever told me about. You always hear about Get It While You Can and like those types of songs. But I thought the title was super interesting. And at first I bumped on it because I said, well, she's a feminist icon. Why is she saying this? Like, clearly this is fake feminism. Probably all of the things that people feel when they see our title. And so the emotion was so strong that I clicked on the song and I listened to it. And when I listened to it, I heard that she was basically doing the same themes that I was writing about in my movie 6 years later. You know, the pains of being a second-class citizen, really kind of making fun of it and asking why is this the way that things are still happening, and just acknowledging this barrier and acknowledging the ridiculous absurdity of it all. And I love the title. I thought the title was, it elicited such an emotional reaction from me that I was hoping that if I could use that title for my film, it would elicit the same emotional reaction. And so far, I think it has. So I will say, if you guys are all writing your scripts, I like to think, well, I like to say that it seems that the only page that is guaranteed a read is the title page. Everyone says 10 pages, 5 pages, and like, sure, some people do 5 pages, some people do 3, some people do 10, some people do 20, but they have to read the title page. If you can make an impression with your title page, you'll probably get the read.
No, that's a great note. I definitely agree with that. I mean, in a lot of ways, it kind of just emphasizes what the entire film covers without you even needing to dive in further and reading the script. You're kind of like already drawn to it right off the bat. And I think just the kind of idea around women, and particularly Latinx women, I think just the opening of the entire film of like, one, touching on how she's Latinx and also how she's a student and the pregnancy and the whole kind of like, this is what you encounter because of what you lack access to or because of what society's perceptions of women are. How did this idea around one being kind of a second-class citizen, also being a woman of color, also, you know, occurring in a time when women just weren't recognized for who they were? How did all of these different elements kind of tie in further to the message that you wanted to give the audience?
That's a really good question. The message was about, you know, when you grow up in these communities, the expectation, at least for me and the people I grew up with, is always really, really low, right? We were lucky if we got out of high school not pregnant. You know, that was kind of, and it was really hard to like, I mean, the school that I went to always set the bar higher for us, but it was always kind of a noticeable thing that we were the exception, right? We were expected to be the exception. And when you kind of grow up with those expectations, it's really like, it messes with you a little bit. So with regards to your question, I wanted to make a film about bad options, right? Because the expectations of us were so low, but it was frustrating to me growing up that the expectation was because of my culture, it was because of where I grew up. And it wasn't because of the options that were available to us, right? And so when I started talking to my mom about her life and her stories, I realized that the expectations of her were low. But again, they weren't tied to her socioeconomic class. They weren't tied to her access. They weren't tied to anything. They were tied to her as a person. And that never really sat right with me, because if you put any person in the situation that Selena is in, I'd be remiss to ask you, would you make different choices? How? If you have 3 choices and all of them are bad to worse, you're going to end up in a bad situation. And so often we see this so much with young people now, like regardless of where their cultures are from, you know, we see this with the school to prison pipeline. We see this across the board, and it's not a character flaw. That's what I always struggled with in the media. It seemed like every time we were represented, or women were represented, or young women, or Latin women, or whatever, it was a character flaw. these stereotypes, and not a cause and effect of very real circumstances that they had no choice in. It's not Selena's choice that banks won't give loans to young women, as it's not my choice as a generation, the next generation, that I don't have generational wealth because of choices that were not accessible to my mother at that time, right? So it was just a question of like, where did the cycle start? And is it a character flaw or is it a systemic flaw? And it's always a systemic flaw.
Exactly.
And we don't see that in films. And we never saw a movie in the I never really saw a movie in the 60s or 70s that portrayed women as the heroes, or portrayed, and not the love interest, or portrayed people from all cultures, because we have Asian American story, we have the African American entrepreneur here, we have a white woman dealing with trying to make it through the patriarchy and help as much as she can without giving herself up. You know, like there's a lot going on there.
No, absolutely. And I love that you dove into those different elements. Like it wasn't just a matter of, you know, like one individual person and how you exist alone. It's really the intersectionality of these diverse communities. And I felt that that's really powerful, and often something that most films that, you know, try to have this progressive narrative like fail to include. And so I really, really appreciated that. And I would say that in the beginning, when it centers around this idea of pregnancy, there's one scene in particular that stood out to me. It's when she has the belly and she's walking down the hallway, and there's the Catholic nuns, and then the parents, and then the doctors, and all of that kind of really just reinforces the idea of how this kind of circumstance and the way that it's kind of perceived that, well, no one told you to get pregnant, right? That was one line that kind of, and I've heard that growing up just with people in my community, like that's often the argument, like, well, you chose or you made that choice. But it's also addressing, why is there a stigma around birth control? Why is there a stigma around even talking about sex in the community, which often results in people, getting pregnant? And so I really, really appreciated that. And then also, I really wanted to touch on kind of the central role that men have in this film, and how it's clearly identified in one, either, they're the cause of the problem, or they're the ones who give access in the case of, having the ability to work or to learn about money, or just being oppressive in general. What was your intention here in kind of showcasing the various roles that men play and how they are contributing factors to kind of the oppressive experience that women have?
Well, back to circumstance, right? They're part of the circumstance. If you're a woman in this time period, this is most likely the type of masculine traits that you're dealing with. And so it wasn't about talking badly about these men, and it wasn't about judging them. They are also a product of their circumstance. Don Juan is a product of his circumstance. He has been indoctrinated into a type of masculinity that was very common at the time. And then Mateo's character is right on the cusp of, having grown up and learned from that version of masculinity, but also butting up against the women's movement, where all of a sudden femininity and masculinity are being challenged, or femininity is challenging masculinity. So he has to kind of figure out, like, who is he in this changing time, as well as coming back from Vietnam. And a lot of our men came back from Vietnam, and mental health was not barely something that was talked about in the white community. Sure as shit wasn't talked about in the Latin community. Sorry. So like, again, all of these things that have been attributed as character flaws, alcoholism, abusiveness, are really, it seems to, if you look at it, it looks like it's not a character flaw, it's a circumstantial flaw. It's a circumstance, a reaction to a circumstance. So that's kind of how I approached all the men, even with Gilbert's character, right? Even having the ability and the knowledge of what his grandfather went through, like, he's still in a circumstance where he's in a position of power, right? And that's part of his circumstance, and he's making choices based on that. So most of the time, what I'll say is, like, if you're trying to talk about something really difficult, and I'm not sure that, we might not have hit it all the way, like, we did this really fast, but what I tried, at least the intention, whether you agree with it or not, the intention was to treat everybody with dignity. Very specific word, dignity, not empathy, because empathy is, oh, that's so sorry for you.
Right.
Not sympathy, because again, so sorry for you. Or empathy, I can imagine how you feel if I were in that situation. Dignity, Dignity is an admiration and a respect for the journey that someone is going through, regardless of what that journey is. And that lens helps a lot in writing. It definitely helps a lot in how you pick the camera and how you choose your shots. Because even for this, when you're going in, it's like, okay, I want to treat these characters with dignity. It changes how you shoot them. So we shot this with the Orion anamorphic lenses, because the anamorphic lenses give you a hero shot, right? So you see the big like Marvel superhero shots. It's usually like a lens that puts the character right in the middle of the shot, and like the background kind of like falls away because you're supposed to focus on the hero. So we wanted to use that for these characters because you never see that. You never see this community shot as heroes. So dignity was a big reason why that came across the way it did.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's super important in just determining, one, the way that the film is structured, but also how we perceive that individual. And these communities are often neglected in that way. And I think when it does come to the men in particular, again, there are instances where, we can understand how circumstance influences, or we can understand why, the society is structured the way it does. But Selena, various times throughout the film, is very intentional about the way that she navigates that. And she does it with a sort of conviction and intelligence and understanding that I feel like most films choose to ignore, kind of like, women are often perceived to be kind of just naive or not aware. And so in your ability throughout the film, you really try to focus on her knowing what she was doing and being intentional about it. How was that kind of reflected and throughout the film? Like, is that something that you wanted to ensure that the audience perceived that, or was it just kind of based on her character and the traits that she embodied?
Well, that's probably because of the fourth wall breaks. I think if you don't have those fourth wall breaks, it turns really quickly into trauma drama, which I didn't want to make.
Right.
I think the reason you feel like she knows what she's doing is because the fourth wall breaks happen. And the importance of that was that I didn't want the characters to be victims. And again, trauma dramas, I feel like it's just enough of that, enough seeing us behind bars, enough seeing us, brutalized and beaten. And it's too much, right? Like I understand that that's part of our story, but it's not all the story. And the fact that that's constantly the lens is just, I don't think it's helping anything. So I wanted her to have agency over her own life, over her own body. And when she's talking to the camera directly, that's the purpose, right? She's like, I'm in this situation, but and I know why we're in this situation. So that was really important to me, to not make a movie where we're downtrodden and what's it called, like torture, poverty porn, torture, pornography. Like it's a lot. It's enough of, we all probably have, I said that and probably like 17 films popped up in your head. It's, there's a reason for that.
No, for sure. And it's unfortunate that that is the way that we perceive it, but ultimately, through this film, I think it's changing that narrative for sure.
Thank you.
So I think that was awesome. But to the point of Selena, she contrasts a lot from the other women in the film. And one relationship in particular that stood out was the relationship between herself and her mother, which I kind of resonated with a lot. And I think a lot of, Latinx women can see some sort of similarity between what they experienced there too. What was kind of the intention there? And, the presence of like domestic violence and toxic masculinity really embodied in this household. And then her still being strong in her conviction later on to like have her mom still be in her life. Like, how did that kind of come into play? And why did you think it was so important to have that?
Because, I don't think Alejandra's character, the mom's character, is, I think she is in her own way defiant, right? Like she's also trying to survive a situation in the way that she was taught to survive a situation. So she says in that first scene where they have the first altercation, she goes, "Go study. I'll wash the dishes. You go study." Right? So she's trying to save her daughter already from the life that she had. So she's like, "I'll take on this home stuff. You go do your work," right? And obviously it devolves into hell. And then later when she sneaks back into the house, like she's left her daughter food because she didn't eat it, right? So I'm just getting emotional. Those are little things that like my grandmother did for us, right? She wasn't really going to cuddle us or anything like that, but she also made sure that we didn't cook or clean, Like that was very specific. She's like, you're not going to cook or clean. And if we were doing homework, she made sure that we stayed, she kind of kept the craziness towards like the front of the house so that we could, and that was her way of telling us, of making us, she used to say like, I don't want you to have to like be in a house. And I never understood why she was saying that, right? She always wanted us to be out of the house, be a woman that makes her money outside of the house. And I mean, my grandmother has an 8th grade education, but she already knew more about feminism than I think most people do, which is the thing that's really keeping us down is our economic security, our ability to make choices out of money. So Alejandra's character, the mother character in this movie, like she's staying in an abusive relationship because she has nowhere else to go. And she has a daughter that she has to provide for. And in this world, this is the only way that she can provide for him. So keeping the father from beating her, from the daughter, is in her own way a way of protecting her daughter. So it's hard to call her passive or call her weak because it takes a very strong person to stay in a situation like that because they have no other choice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's definitely something that I also got very emotional around. And that there are certain moments just like it really, it becomes kind of nostalgic in a lot of ways. One, when she's like, watching the kid, or just like the environment itself, the way that the house is, and the way Selena just kind of
that kitchen, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Every Latin kid, if you guys are on this thing, every Latin kid in America that grew up with any sort of Latin knows what that kitchen looks like. It's the center of the house. There's always rotted fruit because no one wants to throw anything away because it's too expensive. You don't know how much money you're bringing in that week. There's always that freaking wooden spoon and that wooden thing. And there's like trinkets of the motherland everywhere. And there's always like one light and the table's pushed into a corner because it's super small. And you're all like eating like this. So like that's that kitchen, every Latin kid in America knows what that kitchen looks like.
Oh, that was great. And see, that was definitely like a moment where the second that you see that kitchen, you already feel like in that space and you know exactly how this is going to go down or what conversations or the way that they talk to each other. And it's, in some ways it's really good and being able to feel that, but it's also really traumatic too, because there's a lot of moments that just are, part of the experience. But nonetheless, I think that one, it was super impactful in that way, but it also just gave me I guess, the ability to recognize how one is not their circumstance. And I think Selena, in her trying to one kind of go to school in the beginning and then later on having to get another job as a result of having to pay more rent by, this oppressive force in her own household, which again is kind of tearing her down. So how did this idea of money, you mentioned it right there, like, not wanting to spoil food or not having any more milk, or money plays a central role in just like what you're able to do or what you're forced to do. And how is that something that you tried to stick out throughout the film? Like, why was money such a key element, and in what ways did you think it was unique in trying to showcase that?
I mean, I'm glad you picked up on that. Nobody really talks about it. Like in any community, frankly, like money is the thing that this film is really telling. If you take anything from this movie, it's invest in the stocks and like make money, like learn how to have your own wealth, because that's how you're going to have choices. This movie only exists because my mother learned how to make her own money and was able to give me a little bit, and because I learned how to make my own money. And was able to put it into this. Like this industry it's a rich kid's game, and it's like that's why you don't see stories about people without money that often, and you get a lot of stories about rich people and rich people problems, because that's the lens that it's coming from. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you see the pervasiveness of it, and that's because it's expensive as shit to make a movie. So in the indie space has been really saturated with it because the ability to make these types of movies are coming from generational wealth, and generational wealth is because of the things that happen in this movie systemically are not ours, do not belong to people of color. So it was important for me to put into this film like messages that my mom had taught me, that my grandmother had taught me about save your money, save 25% of every paycheck, like invest in 401ks, invest in Roth IRAs, like invest in yourself, because then you'll have options. And like the fact that this film exists is a testament to that. I invested in myself and I had options. So, this is college. Please, for the love of God, have a Roth IRA if you can. And please start investing in stocks. Like understand what compounding interest is. You know, if you're a female, for the love of God, negotiate. Everybody is 50%ing you going in. So ask for double and like land somewhere around 85% of what you think they're actually giving you, because there's always more money. Like these are things that I had to learn by falling a lot.
Drop the gems. Yeah, let us know. Let us know. I think one, I mean, yeah, we're not taught at all. Money is not really a conversation that you're taught in the household in Latin. And a lot of it has to do with the way your parents felt that they couldn't negotiate, or that they couldn't say anything or couldn't speak up.
Right. And that's the thing too, like you have the right to negotiate, and like don't even, it's when it drives me nuts, and I used to do this too. It drives me nuts when I was like, oh, but I should just take what I get. No, my family took what they got because they had to. I don't have to. And every time I don't do that, I'm spitting on them. Yeah. So just do it because you have the ability to. And if someone's not going to pay you, great. Well, I mean, one less thing you have to deal with. Like, who wants to be at that job anyways?
Exactly. No, I think if there's anything to take away from this film, I'm glad that you said it's that. And I think that that's something that needs to be taught or talked about more. And I think when you open the film in the beginning with like stretching a penny, being resourceful, like trying to take initiative, what was the intention in opening with that at the very beginning? One, I kind of get the sense of, yes, like the importance of money and the presence of socioeconomic status and being second class. But I think by having it at the very beginning, it was just like, one, it resonated with me because like, well, I grew up in poverty, and like I resonated with the character immediately, and I knew exactly what she was talking about. But I guess for other folks who don't have that lived experience, like what do you hope they take away from that?
Be resourceful. I read this book by Malcolm Gladwell, and I don't like to follow hype or whatever, but he's the guy for the outlier dude. And like I have issues with the outlier situation because like you have to be able to afford to spend 10,000 hours on something, sir. So I begrudgingly read his second book, or his third, whatever book, called David and Goliath. And he's in the main, it's 300 pages, and the thesis gets said in the first chapter, which is like your disadvantages can be your greatest advantages. And at that point, I was like, I got nothing but disadvantages. So if I think about it that way, I have nothing but advantages. And that actually worked because, you know, there was no way I was going to get money to do a period piece. Like, it's just not going to happen. Everyone said make my first movie in one room, which is just like a way of getting me out of the office. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to play small. So I was like, okay, I don't have this. I'm never going to have this. And that's kind of my mom's journey, isn't it? And it's my journey, and it's the story. So why don't I just tell the audience that that's what we're doing? And so I opened it with that. I was like, look, I'm going to tell you this story. I have no way of doing this the way that you think it should be done or the way it's been done before. And that's part of the story. So go with me. And so that's kind of how that happened.
Okay. No, I love that. And I think that actually ties into one of the questions from the audience. So I'll go in briefly into some of the questions.
Oh yeah, I see a couple of them.
Yes. So one that resonates or relates to that is Sophia Ruiz wanted to ask what your experience was in translating your family story into a script, and what the process was in blending real life events with fiction for the writing.
Yeah, adaptation. You kind of have to take certain things and like either augment them or move quickly through them. So like for us, we moved the time period up a little bit. Like we moved it to pre-Roe versus Wade because what the actual events I think happened around 1973 or so, 1974. So Roe versus Wade had kind of just passed, but in theory, like all of us here know that like if you change a law, it's like sure, but it takes forever, like for it to actually come into effect, or for people to like start operating as such. So it was more about like, okay, what's the message? Where are we going with it? What needs to be augmented? What needs to be still staying true to the through line, right? Like I didn't like all of a sudden have, like, you know, we weren't like a space movie all of a sudden, but it was just kind of like finding a balance for it. And also where could I infuse myself, right? So like, for example, Marty is more my story. Marty's the character is more something that, you know, I encountered in my own life. And that relationship with that person and how it changed them. And maybe they didn't die, but they definitely changed, and a part of them died. And then thinking like, well, shit, what would have happened had we been in 1974? She would have died, and I would have, you know, had to live my life without this person. It was unimaginable. So you kind of just infuse a little bit of some of the stuff that's for you. So for like the Gilbert character, Gilbert was a real person in my mom's life, but the sexual advances were more something that had happened to me with a mentor character. So you just kind of pick and choose where you find where you can insert like your story, because you're still telling a story, but like trying to stay as true as possible to the source material.
Great. No, thank you for that answer.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Here's another question from Elisa Mann. Why did you decide to break the fourth wall and have the actors talk directly to the audience? He says it seemed to be a very direct way to incorporate facts about institutionalized sexism and racism in the US, and I found it really refreshing. Why did you choose some scenes and not in others for this technique?
We use them for two reasons: to give context or to give attitude. So for example, in the bank scene, did anybody really know here that in 1974, it was okay for banks not to give you loans because of your skin color or gender? Like I sure didn't know that. So like that bank scene doesn't have any stakes if the banker doesn't turn to you and go, by the way, this is why this is happening, right? Because there's no context that we just don't know these things. We're purposefully not educated on them because it's, again, a character flaw that people of color don't have money. It's not a character flaw. It's built that way. So there, for that reason. And the other time is, again, back to the trauma drama situation, like the everyday sexism thing. Like I'm not going to make her sit there and go like I'm not going to do that. There's enough movies. Go find any other movie in the world for that. So I wanted her to go, yes, I see this oppression happening and I see you seeing it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I definitely liked the just speaking directly various times throughout the film for
Thanks.
like, and I feel like it really informs people who don't understand history. Like, and I think it's,
thank you. A lot of people hate it. It's really funny. It's the most polarizing thing. Yeah, for real. It's like for real, like that seems to be the most polarizing thing. And I have my own theories. Like one of my theories is like breaking the fourth wall is a white comedy trope, right? Like it's been used forever, but in comedies with white people for the most part. And we took it and used it for female brown defiance. Like that's just always going to cause problems.
right.
And when people are like, I don't want it, it's like, well, do you want a trauma drama? And I'm not going to give that to you. Sorry. You know, go literally find any other film to do that. No, but yeah, it's been really interesting.
Okay, cool. No, and there is another question here similar to that. So you broke the fourth wall in the opening scene and several times in the movie. How do you balance letting the story tell the background of the times versus having the actor break character and explain the background? So I guess similar question, but maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know if we nailed this all the way. I mean, I've definitely heard people say it's too much, it's not enough, it's great, it's perfect. So I think because it's so mixed, I think it's like good because that means like it's not, you know, everybody's having a different perception of it. You know, I tried to be rhythmical with it. Like if we hadn't heard from her in a while, I wanted to put her in there. There's definitely more in the script than there are in the movie. For example, like during the Marty scene, when Selena's like trying to break open the door, between that and her finding her in the cot, there was this long, like fourth wall break where a nurse is leading her to Marty, and she's explaining that septic wards were something that existed in every single hospital in America pre-Roe versus Wade, because so many women were coming in with sepsis, which kills you very quickly, because of botched abortions that they had tried to do themselves or did with somebody like the dentist. And the fact that every hospital in America had a septic ward is insane. We don't have that anymore, thank God. I mean, we might be going there again soon, but that one just felt, the reason I pulled that one out was because you're so emotionally invested in what's happening that stopping it just didn't feel right? It worked great in the script, didn't work in the movie. So it's kind of like trying to find that balance in the edit.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see how that, I think it's kind of going through, playing it out, and then one also kind of with the actors themselves and seeing what they feel like feels best. Maybe
there were definitely those, like the opening scene was a lot longer, and on the day we kind of just changed it. The one scene that didn't change at all was, again, back in when Marty goes in to have the procedure with the dentist. Selena breaks the wall and explains the catch-22. That's verbatim what was in the script. And Lorenza really found a way, and so much of this was riding on her, really found a way to make like it's pretty chunky, and she found a way to make it like humanize it and make it come out of her mouth. So I don't try to get too stuck on the script, because at the end of the day, if they're not saying it and it's not working, it's not working. It doesn't matter how great it was on the script. No one's reading the damn script. They're hearing what she has to say. So being a little bit more loose with that has helped me. I know some people aren't so loose with it, but for me, it's like if it's not grounded for the actor, it's not gonna ground. You're not gonna like it either.
Right. No, and it definitely seems really authentic. Like you can
Thanks.
tell that the actors themselves have some sort of connection to the character
Thank
or
you.
to the scene, which also influences the way that we as audience members feel.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And then one aspect before we get closer to closing out tonight. Oh, actually, we have another question here in the chat. Let's
Yeah,
go.
I see a couple. I can see the chat.
Yes, I believe we went through most. So let's do this most recent one from Alexandra. She says, I find it really interesting that the director directly addressed sexism, racism, etc. in the characters' dialogues. Could you please talk more on this and why you didn't choose to demonstrate such discriminations in more implicit ways?
Implicit meaning more subtle.
I believe so, yeah.
For that reason, I think if it's subtle, it becomes a trauma drama. And that wasn't the intention here. The intention here was to be in on the joke, it was about defiance and agency, and where she doesn't have agency in the moments where she can't break the fourth wall, because she's surviving, and the way she has to survive in this world is to be passive and to be reactive to what's going on. Like that's a choice, right? So when we gave her agency, it was through the fourth wall breaks, because at that time you don't stand up to the abusive dad. Like you don't tell the banker to go to hell. Like you don't do that stuff because you got to come back, So we had to like find ways to balance the passivity that is required of her as a woman of color in this time period to just survive, with the agency that we all as women in 2021 have because of the born off the shoulders of the head down that the women before us had to have. They had to keep their head down so that we could raise our heads. So it was a way of like marrying the two.
Right. No, definitely. And I think ending the film with this kind of, owning land and creating generational wealth and finding ways around the system, like in what way is that kind of thinking, like, as we look forward into this new era of women empowerment and what's possible based on what's occurred in the past? Or is it just something that you felt was important because, owning a house and being in control? I guess what was kind of the inspiration for ending the film on that note?
Because it was a symbol, right? It was a symbol of finding your own place, finding your roots, finding your own way to stand, right? My favorite line in the film is, they won't let me buy a house, they won't let me rent one, but they can't stop me from building one. Mm-hmm. And everybody has a version of that for themselves, right? They won't let me do this, won't do that, but you can still find a way to do it on your own way. For me, it was, they won't hire me to direct a film, they won't finance one of my films, but they can't stop me from going and shooting something, right? So that's like my own defiance moment. So ending it in the house, was a house that she built nonetheless, was really just like that moment of, okay, what can you build with your disadvantages? Like, what, people throw rocks at you, what castle are you going to build with that stone? And then the plane, right? The plane was a symbol of forward, aside from being like the callback to Marty, it's a symbol of forward movement, right? So you leave the film I was hoping it would leave you with where are we going? And then very quickly you go, well, where are we going? What's happening tomorrow, right? Aren't they hearing Mississippi tomorrow? Like, it's pretty insane.
Yeah. No, I feel like it was a really powerful way to end it.
Thank you.
It makes you feel a strong sense of empowerment. She runs out the house and looks up at the sky and just is like really in her power. Really makes her an empowering like woman moment. And for the last couple minutes here, I do want to touch on the casting because we have another question here.
Yeah, well, I see a question here about Snow Patrol. It's been there for a minute, so let me answer that. The Snow Patrol happened because I was sitting with my composer, and again, back to that plane scene, we're like, well, how do you want this to feel? Because everything's based on how it feels. How do you want it to feel? It's like, I want it to feel like triumphant, but also just when you're just at a club and the needle just drops, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic. It's like, I want that feeling, right? Because we've just gone through all of this, and I want to just give them that space to celebrate. And he's like, oh, that sounds like a Snow Patrol song. Or he would just like put in Open Your Eyes. And Open Your Eyes is also was like a call to like, yeah, like open your eyes, like this stuff is going to keep happening if we don't stop it now. He was like, I mean, it should feel like this, but then he started to find something like period appropriate. And I was like, no. Period appropriate doesn't matter because this is every period, right? So we have that space. And I was like, just leave it in there. It's like, people are going to skewer you for Snow Patrol. I was like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. It feels right. I don't care. And it's been great, right? Like, and people are like, what the hell is a Snow Patrol song in here? Like, yeah, there is, because it's happening in 2021. It happened in 1967. Like, it doesn't matter. We have Donna Summer. She's from the 80s. There was one review that was like, did you know that Donna Summers was not in the 80s? I was like, no, fully over my head. Just kidding. Like, of course I did. But like, that's just like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I don't care. It's about the feeling. And then with the casting, funny story. So we did a pretty extensive search. I did not particularly had Lorenza Itola in mind. I did an extensive search, right? And it was really hard to find Selena. It was like harder than I expected it to be. Not because people weren't coming in fantastic, they were, but it was like a very specific thing that I don't know, it was just something. And then I found Lorenza, and she became unavailable because she was on another movie set in the 1960s called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that continued to push its schedule. And I can't compete with Tarantino. And it was literally like watching somebody eat steak when you have like a tiny piece of bread, because it just had all these cars that I was never going to be able to afford, and like all this production. And I was just like, oh, please, like, stop filming so I can pull this actress off and use her and have her be in our film. Thankfully, he stopped filming. And we had pushed too because something had happened in our schedule. So the timing worked out really well. We sat down and I met her, and we just started talking about, we'd never really talked about the script. I swear to God, we only talked about like how we grew up and our mother stories. And it was just very clear that like she was Selena. Mm-hmm. So like, I think in the casting process, from what I try to do is not really cast for like parts, but really cast for people, because I think all actors are good. Like, if you got into the stage, you're a good actor. But if you have a core connection to the story somewhere, just anything, it just tends to work better. So that was with everybody. Chrissy Fit, core connection. Brian Craig, core connection. Simu Liu, core connection to the story that he was telling. And I think that's why it all popped.
Yeah, I'll read the other.
So, yeah.
If you could talk about the character arc of the white woman who worked at the bank. This is a good question. She turned out to be really kind and empathetic, but she seemed to be upholding white supremacy and the patriarchy for most of the film. Such a complete twist. So I guess, what was the intention behind that?
Yeah, well, again, back to like not judging people. That's actually my godmother. And you know, white women have certain privileges that women of color don't have. And I think it was important for me to show how misogyny pits us against each other, because it doesn't seem that misogyny is culture or gender specific, right? It's a learned behavior in a patriarchal society. If we lived in a matriarchal society, the learned behavior would be misandry, it would be the opposite. So again, circumstance, not judgment. Misogyny is like the police, right? So if a woman does something outside of the norm, her norm set by the patriarchal society, misogyny is a behavior that makes us go, hey, that's not right, and shuns. You either shun or you hurt, you punish the woman so that she will stop doing the action and fall back in line. And that is a behavior that we all learn. It's definitely a behavior that I've used. It's a behavior that's been used on me by all cultures and all peoples and all ages, because if you live in a patriarchal society, again, that is the rule that makes a patriarchal society work. So trying to unlearn how misogyny works, right? Like, if a woman is outspoken and it just bugs you, well, why? Why does it bug you? Is it because of what she's saying? Picture it being said by somebody else that is traditionally an authority figure. Would it bug you then? And the answer is no. Then you don't like what she's saying. You're reacting to a learned behavior, right? And I don't like believing that I can be controlled. And it didn't sit right with me that I was reacting to things based off a learned behavior that I had no choice in absorbing. So with Minerva, it was about showing that, right? Like showing how misogyny is not culture or gender specific, but also with Minerva, she's also just trying to survive in her circumstance as well. And she is trying to help Selena. Again, if you hear her, when Selena first gets promoted, she says, be careful, right? That's as far as she can go in her role to warn this girl. When Gilbert touches her leg, Minerva suddenly walks in because he has a phone call. He doesn't have a phone call. She just doesn't want. She knows what's happening because she's been there. So I'd seen women like, the Whisper Network, I guess, like try to protect me because that's the way that they could help, because they can't just go up against the system either, because they would also be ostracized. So they're trying to help in their own way. It's not perfect, it's not great, but you definitely recognize it.
For sure. No, and I think that was key throughout, like just the different relationships between the mom and the daughter, or the white woman and Selena. I think it's just goes to show women in a variety of ways experience the oppression or the kind of, societal expectations or norms that are imposed on them. I feel like the unlearning aspect is really important.
And for the guys, like, it's not to make anybody feel bad, guys. Like we all learn the same behavior, right? So like, it's just about being aware of the behavior and being like, okay, well, where can I personally do something different? Not what law can I change or what blah, blah, blah. What can I do differently? Like, can I encourage my girl classmates to raise their hand more? Can I encourage my professors to pay more attention to those answers, right? Or to solicit those answers? Like, what can I do as a person to inform myself about this behavior, and how can I change it, right? Like, it's not about judging anybody or making anybody feel bad or wagging your finger at anybody. Like, we're all just, dealing with our own circumstances.
For sure. No, and I think, just thank you in general for having the courage and the commitment to wanting to kind of showcase this news story or reframe the narrative or claim the narrative in a way that no one else has, or we're beginning to see more of. But culturally
Thank you.
across generations, like it's not something that's expected, or was not kind of, you were never encouraged to really do that. And the fact that you were willing to be bold and take that initiative is super powerful. So thank you.
Thank you. Denise has a quick question. Where can you watch this if you couldn't watch it here? And yes, please watch it with your families. I swear, it's crazy when you watch it with your families. Like, all of a sudden, I promise you have no idea who's living under your roof. All of a sudden, you're going to hear stories that you never would have thought of, because trauma, people are holding it in to protect us. So it's like, it's crazy. You can watch it on HBO Max. It's streaming right next to Dune. Which is crazy. Biggest budget in the world, smallest budget in the world, right next to each other. So you guys can catch it on HBO Max. Please do. And again, if you like the movie, please Rotten Tomatoes 5 stars. Super helps.
Yes, we'll do. And I do see here you mentioned about the recording for this interview. I believe Alex will let us know about like having access to that. And then also Denise just said that this interview was informative, insightful, and enlightening. And thank you for having the courage and skill to color outside of the lines. And on that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you guys, USC. You guys have all the power in the world. You are the next generation of filmmakers. Like, it starts in film school. So please, 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 like, just be aware and, do your best and just listen. If you can't do anything else, just get out of the way. You know what I mean? Like, just do it. Like, it's so much about film school. Just pay attention to a lot of, how do I say this? The media is a real part of why we have such low expectations for certain people. And if you're only showing people as drug dealers, if you're only showing them as prisoners, if you're only showing them as immigrants, if you're only showing them as these things, then when voting time comes around and people get on stage and start saying things that echo what you have seen through film and television, then of course you're going to believe it and you're going to vote that way. So if you have the opportunity, not that those stories aren't important, but also show the doctor, the educated, the homemaker, just show those stories too, because they're also there. And hopefully that will create a familiarity with people, so that when they are asked to be put in cages, or when they are asked to be separated from their families, or when they are asked to be massively imprisoned for no reason, there will be another narrative for voters to pull from to say, hey, that's not fair. We know those people. Why are we doing that to them?
Thank you for that. I feel like that is a very good note to end on. Just more, holistically thinking about what do we take from this film? How does it relate to this present moment in society? And how can we begin to reframe and recreate and narratives that have existed in the past and the ones that we hope to create for the future. So thank you so much, Lizette, for taking the time
Thank
today.
you guys. Appreciate
Awesome.
it.
Best of luck
Thank you.
on the movie. It's game changing. And I am excited to see what you do in the future.
Thank you. I'm excited to see what all of you guys do in the future.
All right, cool. And thank you everyone
Okay.
for attending, and we will see you soon.
Bye. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the great questions, Adana.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.